Shane Beamer's already starting to get a lot more respect for what he's done at South Carolina so far in his coaching career, and he has a chance to make another leap in that aspect in 2023.
Our Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, your show for the latest headlines and potential storylines on South Carolina Gamecock athletics. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecocks Digest over on SI.com. Thank you for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen or watch here today. We are free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Shane Beamer has accomplished a lot in his short time here at South Carolina. Obviously, he has done better and better in the win total so far, and he's increased South Carolina's perception nationally and also within his own conference. And that's what we're going to talk about to start off today's show. Because the thing is, if the South Carolina Gamecocks could do a couple of certain things in the 2023 football season compared to some of their SEC East counterparts, Shane Beamer could be nationally recognized as a top 5 coach in the entire conference by the end of the 2023 football season. Back in around mid-March, On3 writer Jesse Simonton, who mainly covers the SEC conference when it comes to college football, put out an SEC coach ranking list, of course, ranking all the coaches from 1 through 14. And for those of you listening to today's show on an audio podcast app, I'll quickly read aloud what his rankings were. At number 1, he had Georgia's Kirby Smart. Number 2 was Nick Saban of Alabama. Number 3, Brian Kelly. 4th was Josh Heupel. 5th was Mark Stoops of Kentucky. 6th was Shane Beamer. 7th was Lane Kiffin. 8th, Jimbo Fisher. Hugh Freeze was 9th. Sam Pittman 10th. And then the rest of the coaches, mainly in the SEC East, went all the way 10 through 14, with Zach Garnett of Mississippi State being last on this ranking list. So here's the thing. I think that this ranking is fitting as of this moment in time for Shane Beamer of South Carolina for a couple of different reasons. First of all, what he has done so far at South Carolina. I alluded to this earlier, of course, but I think it's still important to obviously remind ourselves, but also remind other people outside of South Carolina what exactly Shane Beamer inherited. He took a 2-win program in 2020, somehow got the program up to 7 wins in his first year with a brand new coaching staff and with a roster of players that he was still trying to get to know for the most part in year 1. He then took this team to 8 wins in year 2. And the other thing is the growth on the field in terms of the win-loss totals have coincided with massive growth in terms of recruiting for South Carolina's football program. In the 2021 cycle, the Gamecocks finished with the 80th ranked recruiting class in the country. Now, here's the thing. That gets attributed to Shane Beamer purely because of the fact he was the head coach at the time that this class was finalized. In all fairness, though, it is not applicable, in my opinion, to tie this class to Shane Beamer because he took the job on December 6th, 2020. And the second national signing day for that cycle was around 2 months after Shane Beamer took the job. He had literally no time to get any guys that he probably would have liked in that recruiting class. In 2022, however, the Gamecocks made a massive jump in this area. They had a 24th ranked high school class according to 24/7 Sports Composite rankings, tied together with the 9th overall transfer portal class according to 24/7 Sports. In 2023, the program took another step forward as they brought in the 16th ranked high school class in the country according to 24/7 Sports Composite rankings. So far in 2024, it looks like Shane Beamer and his staff are going to trump that class as they have the 8th ranked recruiting class up to this point. Now, for comparison, let's look at Jimbo Fisher, who, of course, is the Texas A&M head coach and was ranked 8th on Jesse Simonton's list. Jimbo Fisher's won a national championship in his career, going back to his days at Florida State. He's at an SEC school in Texas A&M that is not only located in the most fertile recruiting grounds in all of college football in the state of Texas, where you can quite literally build your own college football program with just that state alone, and he has got a ton of money at his disposal. Texas A&M probably has the most money in terms of donations, alumni base, and the endowment that they have out of all the SEC schools outside of Texas once they joined the SEC in 2024. And despite everything I just mentioned, Jimbo Fisher has only won more than 8 games twice in his 5 seasons to this point at Texas A&M, a tenure that, as of right now, is considered to be a massive disappointment in College Station. Here's another reason why Beamer deserves to be ranked 6th on this list, specifically. He has proven he can win big games in a very short period of time. In 2021, this happened on a smaller scale. The Gamecocks defeated both the Florida Gators and the Auburn Tigers late in the season when they desperately needed to find 2 more wins to become bowl eligible. Yes, Florida and Auburn were both down in those years, but South Carolina was also in year 1 with a less talented roster compared to those 2 teams on paper. The Gamecocks beat both of them. Then they trounced North Carolina, led by an established Hall of Fame coach in Mack Brown, in the Duke's Mayo Bowl. In 2022, the Gamecocks defeated 3 top 25 ranked teams during the regular season, including the Clemson Tigers and the Tennessee Volunteers, both at the end of the season, and both of those teams were college football playoff hopefuls, especially the Volunteers. For comparison, Lane Kiffin, who's Ole Miss's head coach and ranks 1 spot behind Shane Beamer in Jesse Simonton's rankings, in his 7 seasons as a Power 5 head football coach, he has won 8 games against top 25 teams. Now, obviously, that's averaging just a little over 1 per year, which is what Shane Beamer's at right now. But again, Shane Beamer has already proven this in spades in just 2 years. Lane Kiffin has had a couple of really good years where he has done well against top-notch competition, and then other years where, like last season, the Rebels were not able to really defeat anybody that was considered to be one of the top teams in the country. So, Beamer deserves to be ranked 6th, but because he's ranked 6th, that means he's, of course, behind a couple of other coaches. A couple of them on Jesse's list are Josh Heupel and Mark Stoops. And for the moment, I have to admit, I don't have any issue with that. Josh Heupel's done quite well in his first 2 years with the Tennessee Volunteers, and Mark Stoops, of course, has been the epitome of consistency for many years now at Kentucky, a program that was really nothing in terms of football when he took over, and now is a team that, at the very least, you cannot overlook on your schedule. So how could Beamer leapfrog these two in 2023? Well, it's a lot simpler with Kentucky, because I would say the gap between Mark Stoops and Shane Beamer in terms of the perception nationally is significantly more narrow than it was when Shane Beamer started here in Columbia. If South Carolina beat Kentucky, let's say, next season, and they at least match them in terms of their win-loss record by the end, then I think that Shane Beamer has to be put ahead of Mark Stoops. In terms of Josh Heupel and the Tennessee Volunteers, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Shane Beamer to surpass Heupel in this category this coming season. But let's say Tennessee wins 8-9 games, so they take what is mostly suspected to be a step back this next fall. Shane Beamer, let's say the Gamecocks knock it out of the park. They win 10 games, and let's say in the process they defeat Tennessee. This time, it would be in Knoxville. If that were to happen, I think you would have to put Shane Beamer above Josh Heupel, because for the 3rd straight year, he will have improved his win-loss total, and it would be the 2nd year in a row that the Gamecocks will have defeated the Tennessee Volunteers. So, all in all, Shane Beamer's already changed his image as a head football coach in the SEC and in college football as a whole. But if just a couple things go the Gamecocks' way this next season, Shane Beamer can further his perception as a coach even more in 2023 and beyond. Now, South Carolina, of course, I talked about recruiting earlier, and that's something that has been rolling for Shane Beamer and his coaching staff for the past 10, 12 months or so, especially in the high school ranks. But South Carolina just landed another commitment this past Friday in offensive lineman Blake Franks out of Greenville High School in Greenville, South Carolina. What are the Gamecocks getting in Blake Franks? We're going to dive into that more in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. Built March Madness has been around now for the past month for, of course, the NCAA tournaments. So if you want to still make a bracket right now, you can go to www.builtmarchmadness.com to vote for your favorites. I picked Cookie Dough Chunk Puffs to win at the very beginning, and as I've said time and time again, they're by far my most favorite bar or puff out there that Built has. When you vote, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. And one lucky listener or viewer will win a 12-month subscription to Built, where your favorite bar or puff can be delivered right at your doorstep. And again, Built Bars, they are the best protein bars out there. They're jam-packed with protein, they're very low in sugar content, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate to top it all off. So run to www.builtmarchmadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You're already on the website, and they got plenty of good options there. Be sure to take advantage of the opportunity to support your favorite bar or puff today. Welcome back to this Monday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. Let's talk some recruiting now, more specifically, recent offensive line commit Blake Franks. I went back and watched Blake Franks' film from his junior season at 4A Greenville High School, and when watching his film, this was my main take on Blake. Franks possesses the ability to be an absolute road grader in the run game for South Carolina at the next level. The first thing that I mainly noticed with Blake Franks' film from his junior season is his hip movement is extremely fluid. And in this case for Blake Franks, that means that it is quite easy for him to sort of change direction from facing upfield to moving laterally and performing certain blocks that are mainly used in running plays, such as a pull block where you're basically going from one side of the line all the way to the other side looking for an unoccupied defensive lineman or linebacker, or he can also do a really good reach block from his position, which is basically where you try to sort of get ahead of the defender that you're assigned to and try to sort of cut them off at the head of the play and try to open up a running lane for the running back or quarterback for that matter. And again, that makes him a big time weapon in terms of run blocking. And it also allows him to be able to kick block faster when going in pass protection, essentially literally kicking out to get himself in better position to go up against pass rushers. So his hip fluidity helps him out a lot in terms of being able to just move around to different areas of the field seamlessly as an offensive lineman, despite being 6'6", 330 pounds. Blake Franks also does a really good job at running his feet when engaged with a blocker in the run game. And essentially, this doesn't just allow Blake Franks to be able to seal off a gap for his running back and essentially make sure that his, again, assigned defender is preoccupied, but it also allows Blake Franks to clear out the gap in its entirety, because feet movement is quite important for offensive linemen. If you're not moving your feet, then you really don't have any stable base, and you're going to allow the defensive player an opportunity to be able to shed the block more easily, maybe stonewall you, and essentially have a chance to blow up the play. But because Blake Franks, again, does not give up on a play whenever he starts engaging a defender, it gives his skill players, the teammates that he has on offense, a better opportunity to create explosive plays. And the last thing that stuck out to me when watching his film is his get off. Because, again, as I mentioned earlier, Blake Franks is 6'6", 330 pounds. For most people at that size, it's very hard for them to even create short bursts of explosive movement. But that is not the case for Blake Franks. He is quite quick at getting off of the line of scrimmage. And not to, again, sound like a broken record, but he really displays this for the most part in the run game especially. Now, while there's plenty of things that Blake Franks is good at in his game, there's also a couple of other things that he needs to work on a little bit once he gets to the college ranks. The first thing that I really noticed is his lack of arm extension when he is engaged in a block. Because too often in these running plays, while Blake Franks, again, constantly is moving his feet, and that's something that's quite important for offensive linemen when trying to essentially nullify a defender on a running play, his lack of arm extension essentially was masked by his overall size and strength advantage. Think about this from a pure power standpoint. If you're trying to essentially ragdoll somebody in their upper body, if your arms are bent up almost to where your hands are almost right up against your chest, you're not exerting any power there. And while it wasn't maybe that bad with Blake Franks, he found himself in that position quite a few times based on the highlight reel that I watched. Whereas if your arms are fully extended, and with Blake Franks, he's got his size, he's got his strength, he's got his hip fluidity, and he runs his feet constantly. If his arms were fully extended more often, Blake Franks could do whatever he wanted with opposing defenders. But that wasn't always the case, again, in his junior year highlight reel. So that's something that he's going to have to work on for his senior season at Greenville, and also more than likely once he gets to South Carolina. The other thing that I feel like he could do a little bit better with is really popping pads with his hands. And I'm just basically talking just really giving violent jabs, open-handed jabs with his hands, because his hand placement was usually quite good, especially again in the running game. But there were times where it sort of felt like that he left a touch to be desired in terms of really delivering a strike or a blow against the defender that he was running up on. So, what kind of overall player are the Gamecocks getting in Blake Franks? Overall, besides his size, when it comes to Blake Franks' lower body, from the hips all the way down to his feet, Blake Franks offers everything you want in an offensive lineman. He's got a very high motor in terms of his effort. He has explosiveness that you don't see with many guys his size, and he's got advanced motor skills that is evidenced by his ability to move laterally on the football field. And this automatically combined gives Blake Franks a high baseline in terms of his potential at the next level. But how well he's able to create separation with his arms and be violent with his hands in that same phase of his blocks, along with his ability to, of course, become more knowledgeable as a football player at the next level, that is all going to decide just how good Blake Franks is. So again, he's got a very high baseline. And Blake Franks is somebody that is very likely going to be a backup on the offensive line in his freshman season. But everything else that I mentioned earlier, if he can get that figured out, Blake Franks could be an all-SEC offensive guard for this team. I also think that Blake Franks possesses the ability to play some right tackle in the first year or two of his career, depending on how South Carolina's roster looks. But overall, the Gamecocks are getting a really solid run blocker here in Blake Franks, somebody that should really help to open up some holes for South Carolina's future running backs at that position, especially if he can work on just a couple of minute facets of his game. All right, now to cap off today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, I want to talk about South Carolina's women's basketball team. And don't worry, I'm not going to bring up the Iowa game anymore. I already went into all of that on Friday night going into Saturday morning. If you haven't checked out my reaction to that game, you can feel free to go back on the YouTube channel or wherever you get your audio podcasts and go listen or watch that real quick. But here is what I will say regarding South Carolina and their road to winning a national title in 2023 and beyond. The road is going to be a lot tougher starting next season. And there's a couple reasons why this is going to be the case. First of all, LSU defeated the Iowa Hawkeyes and won the national championship on Sunday afternoon. Now, here's the thing. I know that there's going to be some Gamecock fans out there, maybe a lot of you, that are going to sit there and you're going to say, well, Andrew, we got to be honest with ourselves. If South Carolina took care of business against Iowa, did not lose to Caitlin Clark, went to the national championship game and faced LSU, more than likely, South Carolina would be the team hoisting a trophy. They would have won their second straight title because they would have matched up perfectly with LSU, and they had the depth to help them pull it out in the end. And you know something? In that sort of hypothetical, I'm not going to argue against that too much. Here's the thing. Again, as I mentioned the other day on my recent show regarding South Carolina's loss to Iowa and the fact that no one nationally is going to remember this South Carolina team's season because they didn't win a title, that's going to be the same sort of deal in terms of LSU winning the title. No one is going to really always point out the fact that, well, you know, if LSU had to play South Carolina in the national championship game, let's be honest, they wouldn't have that national championship. You don't really see people do that with South Carolina's 2017 national title, where, let's be honest, the Gamecocks caught a break and played Mississippi State in the national title game instead of UConn. Now, Mississippi State still had a good team that year, but obviously, if the Gamecocks had to play the Huskies that season instead of Mississippi State, then South Carolina very well could have lost that national title game. We'll never know that, and that's all that matters at the end of the day. LSU won the title, so from a perception standpoint, the SEC is no longer going to be South Carolina and everybody else in line behind them. It's now going to be South Carolina and LSU are sharing the top perch in the SEC in women's college basketball. And here's the other thing. People expected Kim Mulkey to be quite successful at LSU. There's nobody, of course, that's sitting here saying, I never thought that she would, make it to a national championship or maybe even win one. But in that same vein, I don't think that anybody suspected that LSU would have won a title this quickly with Kim Mulkey at the helm. A lot of people probably would have expected that to happen maybe in year 3, 4, or 5 in terms of winning a title. So here's the deal. LSU won the national championship, so this automatically means that they're going to see a boost in recruiting. They're going to be able to lure more talent. They're maybe going to be able to win a couple of recruiting battles over South Carolina now because they have that national title that they can point to. And next year, LSU is likely going to be the favorite in the SEC because they're returning the NCAA tournament's most outstanding player and first-team All-American, Angel Reese. They're returning SEC Freshman Player of the Year, Flau'jae Johnson. And they have 2 top 7 high school prospects coming in this next season. And again, I know that some of you are going to sit here and you're going to be thinking to yourselves, Andrew, you seem like you're really just ripping up South Carolina's chances of doing anything ever again in women's college basketball, all because they lost one game. And I'm not trying to do that. But again, I think that we have got to be fair in terms of the fact that this is no longer going to be just South Carolina's league. South Carolina is going to have to battle to maintain their top spot in this conference from this point forward. And here's the thing. It's not going to be just LSU. Ole Miss is starting to become a serious challenger in the SEC. Coach Yolette McPhee-McEwen, or Coach Yo, as Rebel fans like to call her, she has really built that Ole Miss program into being now a consistent threat in the SEC and now has made it to the NCAA tournament 2 years in a row. It's quite similar, honestly, to what Dawn has had to do at South Carolina, build up a non-blue blood program, and now 4, 5, 6 years in, she's made them quite respectable. And now Ole Miss has a big win to point to. They defeated the number 1 seed Stanford Cardinals in the second round of the tournament just a couple weeks back. And again, I know some people might sit there and say, well, Stanford clearly was not a 1 seed. They didn't deserve the number 1 seed. Again, does not matter at the end of the day. Ole Miss can sit there, point to that game and say, we can beat the very best teams in this sport. They can also point to the very near overtime loss to South Carolina and say, we can contend with South Carolina. Right? They can do that now. And here's the thing. Like I mentioned with the national title, for obvious reasons, in LSU, that is going to help Coach Yo in recruiting. They're going to start bringing in some more talent to that roster. She's already landed a great transfer portal prospect, I believe, in Kennedy Todd Williams out of North Carolina. One of the top 5 portal prospects this offseason according to ESPN's rankings so far. So you throw in that and also Georgia under Coach Abe, who had a very good year one, considering the fact it was her first year in Athens. And then Tennessee, who of course is going to be Tennessee, they're going to be a good team. Y'all, South Carolina is going to have some stiff competition within their own conference from this point forward in terms of trying to make it back and win a national title. Now, at the time of this recording, the only player that has said that she is leaving is Aaliyah Boston. Zaya Cook has not officially announced anything yet. Bree Beal has not officially announced anything yet. Letitia Mehier, Olivia Thompson, none of those players have announced anything. So South Carolina still doesn't quite know yet, at least publicly, who's coming back and who's not. And that could play a big role into how South Carolina could compete this next year. But the bottom line with everything I just mentioned is this. South Carolina's not dropping off. Do not misconstrue what I've been saying. I'm not saying that all of a sudden now the Gamecocks are never going to win another title. They are going to always compete. Don has built this program to where it is now sustainable, and they are always going to be up there near the top. My simple point here is this. It is not going to be as easy as it was in years past. It is no longer going to be as easy. And of course, the SEC was not always going to stay lying down watching South Carolina just beat them year after year after year. But now it's going to be about 4 or 5 teams that can maybe win the SEC title, that can compete and really push South Carolina. So this next year is going to be quite telling, in my opinion, in terms of how is Dawn Staley and this team going to be able to handle the increase in competition. They'll likely still beat the majority of the teams I just mentioned. But again, LSU, they're going to be a bigger threat. UConn is going to look to bounce back. There's a lot of interesting storylines heading into 2023, and stiffer competition for the Gamecocks is going to be one of them. So with that being said, y'all, that's going to do it for today's show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show, as always. What are your thoughts on sort of how the rest of the country views Shane Beamer currently in the SEC coaching rankings? What do you think of him being ranked 6th by Jesse Simonton? And what do you think he needs to do this next season to be ranked in the top 5 in these kind of rankings? Let me hear your thoughts on that topic and the other ones I discussed today, as always, down below in the comments section. If you watch today's show on YouTube, or if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app, you can shoot me a direct message on Twitter at @aline_SC. And also, thank you once again for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen or watch here today. For your next listen or watch, I would like for you to go check out Locked On College Basketball, where experts Isaac Shade and Andy Patton bring you everything you need to know both on and off the court. Plus, you'll hear from big-name experts, coaches, and players throughout the basketball landscape. Locked On College Basketball is available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. But once again, that does it for me on today's show. Have a great rest of your Monday and a fantastic start to the work week. And I will catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.